Hello and welcome back to the online sociology lesson series. In this video I'm going to be having a look at the technique for short answer questions. You are now under exam conditions. Stop talking. The exam hall is where you're going to be doing your final sociology assessments, but you can be prepared before you enter that room. All three of your sociology exam papers are worth 80 marks and you are allocated 2 hours for each paper. This means that we can use the general timing rule for every question on every paper, and that is to spend 1.5 minutes per mark. For example, you should spend 15 minutes on a 10-mark question, 30 minutes on a 20-mark question, and 45 minutes on a 30-mark question. I'm going to start by looking at paper 1, which covers education, methods in context, and theory and methods. But for this video, I'm only going to be looking at the short answer questions 1 and 2 for the education section. I'll do the others in subsequent videos. These are the instructions and information that you're given on the front page of your exam paper. I've pointed a few things out that we will need to consider for the questions that we're going to be looking at in this video. Answer all questions, self-explanatory. It means you don't have a choice of questions and you have to answer questions 1 to 6 on paper 1. The second point I've highlighted there is about doing rough work in this booklet. Just a reminder that anything that you do cross out will not be marked. And then the third point I've highlighted here is questions carrying 10 marks or more should be answered in continuous prose. In other words, that means if a question is worth 10 marks or more, you should use what we refer to as regular or standard writing with sentences and paragraphs. The significance of this then for questions worth less than 10 marks, as you will find on paper 1, questions 1 and 2, is it means you can break things down and consider using things that might not be considered to be regular writing. In other words, it means you can use bullet points. You might start a sentence in a slightly different way than you would do for your other questions, and that's what we're going to have a look at. Question 1 and question 2 on paper 1 and on paper 3 when we come to do this will always start with the command word outline. The only difference between question 1 and question 2 is that question 1 will ask you for 2 reasons, ways, criticisms, factors, problems, etc. Whereas question 2 will ask for 3 reasons, ways, criticisms, factors, problems, etc. As with all exam questions though, it's important to make sure that you read every word really carefully in the exam. If you are asked to outline 2 criticisms or 2 reasons, factors, etc., then the formula that you need to use is as follows. You need to state your criticism, reason, factor as instructed, and that gives you 1 mark. Then you need to explain it for the 2nd mark. You would then need to select another criticism, reason or factor, ideally on a different line of the page for 1 mark, and explain it again for the next mark. If you were asked to outline 2 reasons and you gave 3, the examiner would mark positively, meaning that if 2 of your 3 were correct, you would still gain full marks. To recap, the general rule for short answer questions is state or identify the factor, way, criticism, etc. for 1 mark, explain it for a further +1 mark, and repeat this once in question 1 and twice more in question 2, so that hopefully your exam paper comes back with question 1, 1 + 1, 1 + 1, and for question 2, a further 1 + 1. Please note, in this question, you do not need any named sociological studies in your answer. Let's have a look at an example of a question. Here, question 1 is asking you to outline 2 material factors that might cause educational differences with regards to achievement. Remember the rule. You need to state your factor for 1 mark, explain that factor that you've just identified for the +1 mark, and then do the same for a different or separate factor. Press pause and have a go at writing your answer. Remember, you've got 1.5 minutes per mark, therefore pause for 6 minutes to write your response. You may have found that that took you less than 6 minutes, which means you can use some of that extra time on some of the questions later on. Let's check out some possible answers to that question. This is an example response. Poor housing is the first part of the response given here. Check firstly, is it a material factor? Then look at the other part of the question. Is it a material factor that might cause educational underachievement? In this case, it is, so it scores 1 mark. It then needs to be explained in relation to this part of the question that relates specifically to underachievement, and you're probably looking at a sentence to do this in. In this case, the respondents does explain how poor housing does indeed cause educational underachievement. Therefore, for this question, they score 1 mark and then they get the +1. So far, so good. 1 + 1. Continuing this answer, the second part of it, ideally the respondent has left a line and then has written the following. Fear of debt. Again, it's correct. It scores 1 mark. Then, this next part goes on to explain it. This gives them the +1. Combined with the previous points, they gain 4 out of 4 marks for this question. The mark scheme that your examiner uses will have a range of other answers and will always have this statement, other relevant material should be credited, allowing them to reward you for the correct answers. Here's another question for you to try. This time it's a question 2, which means it's worth 6 marks. Again, press pause and have a go at writing your answer. Remember, you've got 1.5 minutes per mark. Therefore, pause the video for 9 minutes in this case to write your response. Let's have a look at made-up student Z's answer. What would you give them out of 6? Press pause while you have a read. What did you give them? The first 2 points. Working class pupils have overcrowded homes. Working class pupils and their parents cannot afford private tuition. Unfortunately, overcrowded homes isn't cultural, so scores 0. And then cannot afford private tuition is also a material factor, so this also scores 0. The examiner will go to student Z's third point, and restricted code is cultural, meaning that it scores 1 mark for the identification. But it's not explained, therefore it doesn't get the +1. Overall, therefore, this answer scores 1 out of 6. Sad face. These are the answers that would have been rewarded. Note, they haven't used studies, and again, you would only need 3 of these for a 6-mark question. Note the use of the example in the explanation for point 3. That's something you can do to explain your points you've identified. Again, press pause while you have a read of these answers. Please have a look on my sociology site's webpage for more examples of short answer questions.